Hi everyone and welcome back. Today we have a special presentation from two members of the Counselling and Clinical Services team here at the U of A. They will be providing some insight about the common concerns that graduate students have and how they may be exacerbated by the current pandemic. They will present and discuss strategies to help us cope and where to find information and support to help us through these unprecedented times. Before I introduce the speakers, I wanted to first let everyone know that there are currently 7 spots remaining for presenters in the new year, and we would really love to have more student presenters. Please contact either myself or Vivian if you're interested. I'd also just like to give a quick plug to the Geotechnical Society of Edmonton event coming up on December 3rd. This event will feature our very own Amir Hagi, who was the recipient of the NR Morgenstern Award for the best student presentation at these seminars last year. Please come out and support Amir during this presentation. Today we have 2 great presenters in Suman Varghese and Dr. Jasmine Bajwa, who are satellite psychologists, sorry about that. Suman has a split position working with the FGSR and the Faculty of Arts, while Jasmine works with the Faculty of Engineering. Their roles consist of providing clinical treatment to students, providing workshops like this one across campus, and consulting and collaborating with faculty and staff. Please join me in welcoming Suman and Jasmine.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you for that, Kevin. And I love the fancy way that you said my name, Jasmine. I don't often hear that, but it's Jasmine. Sure. No, but I mean that's fine too, and it's Suman. But we're happy to have the extra flair for our name. Thank you, Kevin, for that warm welcome. Oh, no apologies. I kind of actually enjoyed hearing my name saved that way. So thank you for that, Kevin, for the warm welcome. Suman and I are happy to be here and to collaborate with you all and to be present with you. So thank you for inviting us and for allowing us to be here with you. So today we're going to primarily, of course, talk about what I think is really important and vital conversation. The idea of wellness is something that, of course, many people have on their mind, and graduate student wellness, we believe, is its own kind of section that is worthy of acknowledging and describing because of its own unique experiences just being a grad student ourselves. But before I begin, I just want to give my colleague Suman a chance to also say hello. I'm not sure if I heard her or not.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, Kevin already did a great job of introducing us. So yeah, I'm a psychologist as well, specifically with FGSR. So kind of working with graduate students a lot, as well as the Faculty of Arts. So we'll be telling you a little bit more about our services at the end.
Yes, absolutely. So just to go over a bit of the agenda, I know we've got a short amount of time with you folks, and we do want to leave a bit of time for just opening up the conversation and answering any questions that may arise. Both Suman and I will try our best to keep an eye on our chat. And as questions come up, we'll do our best to address them. But of course, we'll try to leave as much time at the end to answer any of those questions. So if questions do arise, please don't hesitate to just jump on the chat, and one of us will definitely be paying attention to that. But in terms of our conversation for today, just really quickly, what we're going to cover are some of the common concerns that graduate students uniquely experience on campus and in their work as grad students. Of course, importantly, talking about some strategies of in what ways can you help yourself as well as help each other, managing through the different stressors that, of course, have been exacerbated as a result of COVID and the pandemic. And lastly, we'll highlight some services and other places where you may need to get some further help as well, which is, I think, really important to keep in mind when we're supporting ourselves as well as others. So just to begin, we wanted to just highlight a little bit about what our graduate student population at the U of A is. And this chart here just really describes the great diversity of the grad students. This might not come as a surprise to you folks, looking at your team and those around you. And it's definitely no surprise to Suman and I. There is such great variety, and this is, I think, a great way to highlight just how great the diversity is in our campus community, especially with our grad students, which I think also uniquely affects the experience of grad graduate school. As you can see, great range in ages. We have a large international student population. And I thought also really importantly, there's multiple roles that grad students are also trying to juggle as almost a quarter. So also self-identify as parents. And what we do know is that there are a number of struggles that grad students may experience. In one recent survey, and what we're going to be showing you is actually just data from the U of A graduate student, where a sample of grad students were surveyed just to ask how their experiences have been in the past 12 months and whether they reported experiencing any of the following from a range of both social as well as psychological and health difficulties or issues. And the data that we're going to share with you, I think, just confirms some things that we already knew speaking to grad students, which there is a lot of distress and concerns and issues that grad students face and experience during their program. So as you can see from this data, there is some really high numbers of folks that are experiencing feelings of being overwhelmed, exhausted, even feeling hopeless at times, perhaps even feeling lonely or having such difficulty with low mood that it was difficult to function. And the reason we wanted to highlight these numbers, not to alarm you, although I can understand if some people may be alarmed by some of these numbers. But more recently, when we've done these presentations, it's actually come as no surprise. I think the only times that it can be a surprise is oftentimes when we're experiencing these difficulties, we think we're the only ones. We look around the people around us and we think they've got it all figured out. There's no way they could be experiencing these. And this data suggests otherwise. It suggests that there is a large variety of experiences, distresses, and challenges that grad students experience. And it's important to acknowledge these because these are our colleagues and our classmates and our lab mates and people that we work alongside and care about. And it's important to acknowledge that at any point, any one of us could be vulnerable to any of these issues. So this just leads into some of the common concerns that we hear at CCS from grad students.
Yeah, so this is obviously just a few of the many concerns grad students report, but we chose these ones because they're the ones that seem to come up a lot. So we're going to just briefly talk about the 4 of them today and then go into some strategies. As we'll show you at the end, we have workshops on a lot of these issues specifically. So if this is the overview, and then you can delve into more information if it feels important. So the first one we'll look at is just adjustment and transition. We know starting grad school can be a pretty difficult and challenging time in life. So when we're starting grad school, some of the things to keep in mind, first of all, how many people are moving from somewhere else. So again, we know 34%, and might have gone up actually because that stat is a couple of years old, are international students. So people are coming to a new country. A lot of others are coming from other cities. So there's a lot to adjust to just in terms of the layout of the city, how things work, the weather. There's just a lot of life stuff that changes. And then coming into grad school, there's just such a lack of structure and routine compared to undergrad, compared to work settings, compared to other things people may have been doing beforehand. And with that comes new academic expectations. Often there's an expectation to do things independently and just a higher standard. So lots of things that are new when we start off. And then just moving into the next slide there. We also wanted to just point out that there's obviously different challenges this year in the midst of the pandemic. So for anyone who has started grad school this year, it's been particularly challenging, and it's challenging for all the existing students as well. So one of the things we know is working remotely has brought a whole slew of concerns, difficulties, just new things we never really thought about before. So if you just started grad school this year, it could be pretty tough to come in and not have an existing support structure within the university. If you've been here for a few years, maybe you had a chance to connect with, your cohort, your supervisors, other people in the department. A lot harder to do that remotely. So there is a bit of that going on. And then on a more practical level, talking about physical space. So I know some grad students have the ability to go into their labs or areas right now, and some don't. So it brings up, again, a lot of different issues. So if people are having to work at home, sometimes it's not ideal, whether that's bad internet connection, whether that's an uncomfortable office chair, whether it's not having privacy or quiet space. So there's a lot of extra concerns that way. And then financial stress. We know with COVID-19, there's been a loss of employment, less chances to maybe put our hat in the ring and get involved in more things. So that's created financial stress. And then we just kind of put this term pandemic stress to just remind us all that we're all living through a pandemic that comes with its own set of concerns, worrying about our health, our family's health, for people who maybe have family far away, worrying about what's going on in different countries and cities. So there's just a lot on our plate in addition to starting this new journey of grad school or continuing it. Which kind of brings us to the next point, which is isolation and loneliness, something that's quite inherent in the grad school experience. So this is something I think people are not often prepared for, or they don't really think about when they start grad school. But what we know, and as I'm sure a lot of you have already experienced, a lot of grad school is working alone, especially when we move away from coursework and we're working on our research. It's very independent. It can feel really isolating. Cohorts are small, so you might get to know the people in your department, but it's not like maybe undergrad where there's hundreds of people studying the same thing. The whole process, if you do a master's and a PhD, it can take close to a decade, and it's a lot of time to kind of be in this bubble of grad school. And then I think a piece that, again, we don't always think about is just that fewer people understand what you're going through. The number of students in grad school is low when you look at the general population, and sometimes whether it's family, whether it's friends, they don't necessarily get the process or they don't understand your research, and that in itself can be a little bit isolating. And then again, specific to COVID-19, there's definitely been kind of a loss of professionalization activities. So that's things like visiting profs, having conferences, things that used to be fairly common. Now, I know as we've adjusted this year, a lot of those things are happening in virtual ways, but it's not quite the same in terms of being able to maybe network or chat with people or have informal interactions. The social events look very different. And I know some departments, some labs, they'd make a big effort to kind of do maybe a virtual coffee hour or meeting time or whatever, which is great. We have to find ways to make it work right now, but we can also acknowledge it's just harder. There's fewer opportunities to connect. And even those informal, like saying hi to your supervisor in the hallway, those kinds of things are gone. So concern number 3, so a bit about anxiety. So this is a little bit of overlap of what we've already said, but just again to reiterate how different grad school is from undergrad. So yes, we're dealing with less structure. You don't just start with a syllabus and here's your midterm, here's your paper deadlines, and you're done. No, it looks very different depending on your program. The challenges of working with supervisors, very, very different when you have a central person you have to work for and build a relationship with, and it's not always a smooth process. There's just more uncertainty with the lack of structure, with more ambiguity. We often don't know what's coming next. And I think like that kind of ties into that other point below, which is less clear what defines success. So again, it's not like, okay, if I study this much and write my paper, I know what's going to happen or do this exam. It's like, no, research looks different. What is success? There's so much failure inherent in the research process that again, can feel pretty uncertain. And then this idea of different and multiple roles. So yes, we're students, but often we're also staff. If we're TAing, our relationship with our colleagues can sometimes be mixed. So all of that can create more anxiety just with that less certainty. And a term that I think we've been hearing more about in the last year or two is this idea of impostor syndrome. It's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek term, I think. In the literature, they often call it imposter phenomenon because it's not actually a disease per se. But really, the idea behind it is like it's when it's characterized by thoughts and feelings of inadequacy, incompetence, fraudulence, even when there's clear evidence of one's abilities and accomplishments. So basically, it's like this idea, they're going to find out I don't belong here. So feelings of having faked it to get to where they are, fears of being a phony, belief that, you know, you'll eventually be found out and exposed, might lead to keeping a low profile. I don't want people to notice what I'm doing. It might mean living in this feeling of self-doubt, seeing everyone else as more accomplished and somehow better. And I think in grad school, this is really common. So this idea of imposter syndrome, we know exists universally. I think there's been studies that show like 70% of the general population kind of has felt this way before. Whenever we're in kind of new environments or challenging spaces or surrounded by high achievement, it's really easy to kind of wonder, oh, what am I doing here? I shouldn't be the one doing this. We know it tends to be even higher in grad school, probably because of the high achievement around us. Hard not to compare ourselves. There is sort of a competitive bend to it. So there's a lot of things that can make it easier to feel like I don't belong. So a few of the features that we notice, what happens with this imposter syndrome, attributing accomplishments to external factors. So in other words, when we do something well, it's not because we're good at it, it's because something happened to make it turn out that way. So I was just lucky, it was a fluke, I somehow tricked them. We minimize the difficulty of completed tasks. It was easier for me than maybe it was for other people. Our awards or honors, we might just kind of discount them. Which kind of ties in with this idea of not internalizing successes. So focusing on failures, weaknesses, things that we aren't doing well at the same time as minimizing our accomplishments. So forgetting our accomplishments and successes and only thinking about the small things. So maybe we've done all these great steps and then there was one small mistake we made. That's all we can think about. So all of these sorts of things can increase that sense of I'm an imposter or that sense of anxiety. And then the last concern we're just bringing up is the idea of the supervisor relationship. So one thing we know about that relationship is, first of all, that it's so central, right? It can often make or break the grad school experience. It's an amazing opportunity to connect and have a strong professional relationship, but we also know that it's a common reason students drop out of grad school is when they don't have a good relationship. It's a tough relationship because there's power dynamics that are involved in it. And there's also a lot of other challenges, for instance, even cultural differences. So it's kind of, again, it's a new kind of role, a new kind of relationship, knowing how to talk to them, knowing what you're allowed to say, what you're not allowed to say, can be really, really challenging. So one of the things that's really important is this idea of connecting with your supervisor. So getting to know them, putting energy into the relationship, discussing expectations and having honest conversations. So again, I don't know, there's been so many grad students I've talked to that they just don't want to have those conversations. It might feel scary. They may not know that, they don't want to know what the consequences are, but actually having those frank discussions and really understanding what's expected can be really, really helpful. And if we look at the next slide there, it kind of just shows like this idea of finding balance. So there's a certain amount of independence and initiative that's necessary in grad school, but we also need some support and direction, and it can, again, make the process so much easier. So we know some supervisors are very hands-off and we don't really maybe get as much as we want. So it's always worth having those discussions, letting them know what the struggle is, and then deciding on options from there. So that's a bit of a transition into the idea of strategies, because our next section here, we're just going to talk a little bit about, okay, so we know that there's all these issues. Here's a few ways that can kind of help.
So hopefully the presentation so far has perhaps hit a chord with some of you folks, validate maybe some of the experiences, because these are things that we frequently hear from grad students that we work with, but also our colleagues who work with grad students or grad students themselves. And of course, Suman and I have been grad students some time ago. We won't bore you with the details of that, but they seem to be everlasting, for sure. And one of the things that Suman and I for sure always appreciate is just the dedication and the effort that grad students naturally just pull, and are often eager to keep learning, which is often a little bit different than some of other folks on campus. So now we're going to be talking about what can be done about some of these issues. If some of the things that Suman's mentioned and described really resonates with you, what can be done? And the next few slides, of course, is again a bit of an overview of these strategies. Many of these strategies could be a workshop in of itself. And you also may notice that some of these strategies are things that you're already doing, which is great, because it can really continue to reinforce those strategies. But I also know personally that reviewing some of these strategies are just a nice, helpful reminder of like, right, I should maybe tighten that up a bit or start doing that again. Because with it being gone, it's definitely had an impact in my life. The first one being able to manage workload. And this one might seem pretty obvious, but I just think that with the pandemic and most of us working quite remote, and maybe isolated in our own spaces, our workspaces at home or just our physical space at home has resulted in doing triple, quadruple duty of what it is serving for us. And I know I can speak for myself. Partly that's really shifted and changed my routine. And the importance of some of these are, can't be understated enough. Because I think it really is important once there's been such dramatic shift in our way of working, that we return back to some sort of routine. And it has to be a routine that, of course, works for your current environment and your current needs. And because with being a grad student, there sometimes is a lack of routine, right? And I think it's really important with creating that routine is starting to see creating some sort of like time structures, being able to even put in kind of like a 9-to-5 work schedule with grad school, because oftentimes what ends up happening is people are kind of working 24/7 or having really odd hours. And the remote allows us to definitely have different hours, but having a set schedule can be really helpful in creating some boundaries and containment of the work, and also allow you to schedule other things that are really important in your life, such as connection or chores or just taking good care of yourself. And I think, being able to manage workload becomes even more important as grad students when you're often involved in so many different obligations, both professionally and personally in your life. And having an effective time management strategy where you are having a clear, deliberate use of your time. Time is like currency. And if we want to be better at how we're spending our time, we have to know how we're using the time and what time is available for us. So having things like day timers or apps that can kind of keep us guided throughout the day of where our time is supposed to be, where is our focus supposed to be, and also a way to organize, random things and obligations and tasks that may come up, so that way they can make it onto your schedule and hopefully finished at some point. With organization, I think that's a given, and with grad school, because I think, again, because there's so many things that we're trying to manage and complete, and they usually involve so many steps along the way, having a clear organizational system in place to, for instance, even organizing articles or organizing, different conference presentations and the team that's required to complete all those things is really key. I'm pretty old school. I really like having some sort of like physical day planner that just keeps all these different obligations, both professionally and personally, into one place. And I often use different organizational systems around the house just to, again, cue myself into where am I supposed to be and keeping an eye on maybe what is needed for me this week or even this month. The ability to prioritize is also really important because everything may seem very important to do, and we can sometimes get really caught up on things that seem really urgent, but are actually pretty small scale compared to other things. And sometimes the difficulty with prioritizing prevents us from using our energy where maybe it's most needed. And that might be on the harder tasks. So being able to prioritize your time and your tasks is also really important. And again, hard to do in our head. I mean, I think there's just so much on our head on most days that being able to visually see it can allow you to determine what needs my attention today and what could be put off later. That's also a really great way of managing any sense of feeling overwhelmed. Usually that's a result of not having a plan in place and not having actionable steps to get that plan completed. And lastly, being able to overcome procrastination. I think we're all guilty of procrastination at some point, but I think in grad school, it can really run rampant. And it can also create quite a bit of havoc then as compared to perhaps even in undergrad years. Really quickly, procrastination can result in really important deadlines, which may mean extensions or having to have talks with our supervisors and maybe the department chair, which is of course very different than in undergrad, where we might be able to squeeze something in last minute. Usually many of the obligations at the grad school level are pretty big projects and activities, and procrastinating can just worsen those accomplishments as well. So all these things are really important to kind of keep an eye out on and find ways around it. And there's different supports that can help you create these routines, but also to help maybe strengthen time management or organization. We have many of the handouts that we'll mention a little bit earlier or a little bit later, but Academic Success Center is also a great resource of finding ways that can create a system that is relevant for your workload. The next piece is about setting boundaries. And it's really unique in terms of being a grad student, partly because of like the different roles that we're kind of exercising. You're both a student and a staff member on campus, and that in of itself can be a bit of a difficult kind of place to navigate. There's also lots of often really great opportunities or lots of different asks that we may have of our supervisor or our classmates, but being able to know your limits and know what you can and cannot take on is really important, because at the end of the day, we also have our own lives and our own activities and academic obligations to meet. So being able to acknowledge, where are you at? What's your capacity? And being able to learn to say no, be assertive in your request, and perhaps even asking for help. Now, setting boundaries is often a difficult task for many people. There's lots of hesitations or difficulties around this. And I'll definitely do a shameless plug of I am doing a presentation on boundaries all on its own later this evening for any folks that may see this as maybe an issue either in their academic life, professional life, or in their personal life. I think being able to know ourselves and know how to speak up and create healthy boundaries with people, places, and things is also really important for us to be successful and to manage our stress more effectively. In terms of working strategies, depending on where you are in your academic grad school career, there can be many things that could potentially help in plugging away on your different tasks. First is being able to find your own research interest in the work that you're doing. So that may include, for those that may be at the beginning stages of narrowing down or setting down their topic, making sure that you're adequately looking at the research and at the literature and making sure that you're finding something that really interests you, that you have an intrinsic or passion about. It can be really easy to be swayed by maybe sometimes our supervisor's work or their interests or where there's funding or what seems to be like the topic of the day. But when we're working on research, it's such a solo activity and we're often working alone that we have to be the engine that drives itself. And it can just make it a little bit easier when the research interest is something that we are personally, for whatever reason, invested in. Now, for folks who may be actually doing research that maybe they're not interested in, you may notice that it's sometimes hard to be motivated to do the work, or there's not like a real draw. And what I would say for that is finding another aspect of the research to be interested in. So you may not be interested in the topic, but you may be interested in the analysis. Maybe that could be a place where you could have some interest, or perhaps in the kind of what is the how are you going to disseminate the information, or what is the impact on society, or what could you suggest for future research? Maybe that could be something to focus on. But I think we need to find that, rationale and purpose for why we're doing this research, even if it's not research that we're inherently invested in or interested in, just to help move it along. And with working, as you may have already noticed, there's so much of grad work that is to work independently. I think there's some labs and some programs and works where there might be some co-authoring or collaboration with the work being done. But a lot of the work is really on your own. So finding a way that works best for you to work independently. In what ways can you drive that work along? And that may not necessarily always mean just working alone all the time. It may mean as you work alone that you have some sort of accountability buddy, or that you join even some writing groups, which of course you can't all write on one thing, you're all writing separately, but at least it gives you that kind of group motivation and drive, knowing that while you're all working on your own thing, having that acknowledgement of you're all working together, getting your own work accomplished can be really helpful. And I know FGSR, along with the Academic Success Center, often run these like boot camp writing throughout the year, but offer a ton of support, because writing and analyzing and doing the thesis or the dissertation is often a real hurdle for many grad students. And being able to do that more in a social support environment can be really helpful. And then just the idea of that everything takes a little bit longer than you think. I know something that I found helpful was being able to have a deadline in mind of whatever the X thing that I was working on, whether it was, the first draft of the lit review, and then being able to work backwards with my supervisor, and not realizing, there was a lot more steps than just hand in first draft. But being able to do that, it made me really realize that no wonder this was getting so hard for me to complete. I didn't realize there were so many steps along the way. So being able to plan it out allows you to really make progress and hit those, mini markers along the way, because everything does take a little bit longer than you may think, and allowing yourself the time can be really helpful for you, keeps you more likely to be successful. So that way, at the end of the day, you can, of course, finish your thesis, continue to plug away and move on to other things that are also important for you. In terms of the personal strategies, now this can be helpful for especially addressing some of the imposter syndrome, but just in general addressing anxiety or some of your own personal kind of challenges you might be having with respect to being a grad student and your experiences of being a grad student. So one of them is being able to focus and reframe your effort and work on the learning versus just the grades themselves. I'm not denying grades can be helpful for many reasons, but when we focus on such a specific outcome-based, and especially with grades, there's so many factors that influence what the grade that we get. Learning is something that we can take on as something that we can control. We can decide what kind of learning we want to achieve, how we make that learning happen. And often when we're in grad school, that is really what we are trying to achieve, is additional learning. But it's easy to get swayed by grades and miss out on the aspect of, the reason we wanted to do this was to broaden our learning and perspectives. And remember that we're not meant to know everything that's going on. We're meant to just learn how things are happening. Being able to keep a record of your successes can be a helpful thing to just keep in mind of what you have accomplished. Again, when we are surrounded by many successful, accomplished individuals, we can forget what our baseline really is and think we're not matching up. But everything that we're doing is a marker of success, and we need to keep those accomplishments in mind. It's kind of like the fuel that keeps us going. And the other thing is just noticing if you're comparing yourself. It really is, apples and like oil. I mean, when we're comparing ourselves to others, because what we know about ourselves is both external and internal, but what we know of others is only the external. And oftentimes what we're seeing is not a great reflection of what's happening internally. And we are all different. So being able to really catch and focus on yourself is going to be really helpful to not get caught up in making some assumptions that may not be true and may not be beneficial to you. And the last one of how to take feedback and criticism, there's often lots of opportunities to be evaluated and to get evaluated on in grad school, and learning to be able to take the kernels of wisdom and support and not to take it as a personal attack can also be a really great way of holding off some of that anxiety as well as the imposter syndrome. Part of learning is being able to grow and to make mistakes. And that is just part of learning. And the more that we can acknowledge that process, the easier the process will be. This slide, might be, again, pretty obvious, and yet it's usually one of the first things that disappears when things get really stressful or people get overwhelmed, are just the basic needs that our bodies and our minds need. This is the only tool really that is going to get us through our goals and our accomplishments and our achievements. And if we don't take care of this tool, it's going to demand attention. And that is when we have less control over what we want to accomplish, because we have to take care of ourselves. So what we want to do is make sure that we are routinely and regularly meeting our basic needs of sleeping adequately, having a regular sleep routine, getting some physical movement, especially now. I know it's a bit cold, but it makes it even more important to get that fresh air and to have our lungs expand and have our hearts racing and just move our body, especially when we're sitting and hunched over at desks and likely non-ergonomic desks and chairs. Makes it even more important for our body to move. Having a healthy diet that's filled with whole foods and regular kind of eating habits, but also being able to learn to relax and to have some fun and have some downtime. That is also really important to establish in our routine. So we're not just working ourselves straight into burnout potentially. We need our bodies to replenish and to make up for all the energy that it's expended. And then lastly, just even taking care of your just basic hygiene, making sure that you're offering yourself that comfort and the nurturing that comes when we take care of ourselves. Being able to develop a social network is, I think, important now more than ever. And yet, of course, with COVID and the pandemic, there might be some added strains or limitations of either nurturing or developing a social network. But it goes without saying that we are social creatures, and we need to have a sense of community and belonging and oneness with the people around us. So making sure that you are frequently and routinely making time to spend with people that you enjoy, whether that be your peers, whether that be your family or friends, but that may also involve expanding your network. I think, many people are feeling lonely and isolated and perhaps having a bit of Zoom fatigue where everything is virtual. And yet, we know that even through virtual support and virtual connections and activities, it helps to reduce feelings of isolation and loneliness. It's important to feel like we belong to a group or a community, which may mean getting involved either on things that are on campus or in our communities, in our faith groups. Many of the places have pivoted really quickly and gone online and offered some form of virtual support and ways of connecting with students, with other community members. And there's still volunteering opportunities. And I think these can be really great ways to give us a sense of belonging, and being able to expand that social network that is so needed at this time, in order to combat that loneliness and isolation that many of us are currently feeling. So the next few slides, I'm going to just really kind of harp on my point of self-care. Oftentimes self-care is maybe perceived as like, bubble baths and things that are like luxurious, but really self-care is a inherently individual activity. And what we're wanting to do is replenish any expenditure of mental, emotional, and physical health that is required anytime we are working and doing things. And something about self-care is that it's necessary. It's not an option. It's not when I have time. It is something that is a necessity, because we need to be able to refuel after we've expended all of that. And so we need to find things that helps us refuel and re-energize. And it's a very individual component. And it involves being able to know yourself. I mean, to be able to know what are some risk factors that might be important for me to pay attention to or keep an eye out that tends to worsen my ability to take care of myself. What are some warning signs or signs of distress that I might be wanting to monitor and make sure that I'm heeding those warnings with some aspect of responding with some self-care. And it also requires being able to regulate that care. So the ability to both intervene proactively and in response to the warning sign in order to prevent it from worsening. But it also just involves just regular self-care practices. And when I mean signs of distress, this is also very unique to us. And maybe one or few signs of distress may not be telling, but an accumulation of them will be. And it's important as you look at these signs, which vary between emotional signs of distress, so irritability, anxiety, moodiness, as well as cognitive difficulties such as forgetting and worrying, and any behavioral changes that you may see that is different than your norm. So perhaps eating or sleeping less or withdrawing socially. People also may often notice some physical signs such as tension, nausea, stomach ache, fatigue, and headaches. These are all potential signs. Not a robust list, but definitely a beginning of a list that is, again, important to monitor if you start noticing some of these accumulate, because that tells you that this is a moment where we're needing to step in and be able to nurture ourselves and give ourselves the self-care that we need. And there's a number of different types of self-care that we may engage in. So that would be something that's physical, such as being able to sleep and move our body. Could be emotional, social in terms of being able to connect with others, and as well as spiritual, spending some time alone, connecting with our faith groups, and things like that. Okay, so I know we went through those strategies fairly quick, and now we're going to have to move on to where to get some help, which will also be, done fairly quickly, but hopefully we'll, have enough time to address any questions that we have so far. Okay, so before we move on to them, I'm just going to quickly check chat if there's any questions. Camila, you had a question about tips to deal with guilt of procrastination. I think that's a great question. Oftentimes, we do feel guilty about procrastination. And I think one of the things with guilt is, it's trying to pay attention and give us some signs of something to correct. And so that might be just telling you of how can we address this procrastination issue, so that way we can feel less guilty when we do procrastinate. But if we need to come back to that question, Camila, we'd be happy to. But we'll head into where to get some help, highlight some resources that could be of help to you. The first one I want to highlight is, of course, your immediate supports. Oftentimes it is our friends, our family, our colleagues, our supervisors, our advisors that we lean on first for our support. And I think sometimes we forget that we don't want to be a burden. We don't want to admit sometimes, but this is a really important place that we want to be getting support and recognize that we are sources of support to others. This group right here is a great example of options for supports, and our ability to both reach out and receive help is really important, and acknowledging that, sometimes we don't know when we're struggling, and having someone reach out to us and just share their expression of care, being able to maybe highlight, some of the things that maybe we've noticed that is different that we wanted to maybe pay attention to or ask a bit about, and then being able to offer maybe some resources that could be more of assistance. But it can't help, we can't overestimate enough the importance of our informal supports in getting us through really difficult, challenging times. To not be alone in what we are experiencing is really important. Some other supports that you might want to consider, especially on campus, is the Peer Support Center. These are trained students who can meet confidentially, usually over, these days, of course, over Google Meet. And there's also a helpline. And they're available to support students on an ongoing basis throughout the year, and are often a great place for many students to go first. It may seem a little bit more comfortable meeting up with another student who is trained and skilled to offer that support to you. In terms of our services, for those who are not aware of Counselling Clinical Service, we are a free confidential service. We are a multidisciplinary team that includes, in addition to psychologists, also our psychiatrists, our mental health consultants, and our psychology interns. And we offer consultations for anyone that may be interested or in support and counseling, or may just need some guidance of what the next steps for them could be. We offer individual counseling, group therapy programs, as well as our virtual drop-in workshops. And we are also happy to make any referrals both to on-campus or off-campus supports, and also refer in-house to our psychiatrists who can help with some medication as well as diagnostic information as well. What we offer gives people the next steps. Oftentimes it's hard to know what to do next. And what our team does, I think, so well is provide a bit of a plan of how to address whatever challenge you may be experiencing. So we are, of course, offering phone and video sessions. We have our regular office hours throughout the week, and as well as some evening hours on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. All of our information can be available online through uab.ca/CCS. I was just mentioning some workshops that we do, and we do them on topics that are commonly experienced by students related to mood, anxiety, wellness, but we also have our ever popular ongoing yoga with one of our psychologists every week as well. Any information about registration is all available, of course, on our website, and there are still some coming up for this semester. We also have a number of handouts that are specifically written for students in mind, acknowledging the common concerns students experience, as well as some strategies that can help. Many of the things that we've mentioned to you today is actually available on our Psychologist Survival Guide to Grad School, which of course can be accessed on our website. But we also have a number of other handouts related to anxiety, stress management, procrastination for those that are interested, but as well as things around relationships and body image and grief. So this is a really great place to sometimes even begin, or even to suggest to those who could benefit from it, just to familiarize yourself with that information, but also to begin putting in place some of the strategies. Okay, now I'm going to switch it over to Suman to talk about, I think, a really great initiative that she's involved in.
Yeah, so I just have a couple more slides here to wrap up, and then I know we have 2 questions, so I'll come back to that. But yeah, this is a podcast. I think FGSR sent out an email this last week, so you might have heard of this, but essentially I've been working with FGSR to kind of just kind of normalize the fact that grad student wellness is a thing, and there's things that people aren't talking about or don't feel comfortable talking about, but we really need to be talking about them. So every month we're just going to be releasing like these 20-minute episodes. We tried to make them as interesting as possible by like having stories from students. So you get to hear from your colleagues and kind of hear their struggles and some more specific strategies of what can help. So if you just Google that, there's a whole web page on FGSR. It's available on Apple, Spotify, Google, everywhere. So feel free to check that out. And the first episode is on imposter syndrome, and next month it's on a grad student isolation. So it'll go more in depth to things we talked about today. And then just really quickly, I'll just mention a couple other pieces for support here. So outside of the university, you do have a graduate student assistance program. So all grad students have access to sort of extended benefits, and that includes counseling services through Homewood Health. It also includes, if you were interested in counseling and wanted to access it privately, you do get a bit of money for that. So just so you know, and you can Google these things and find out more, but just know that these services exist. And on the next slide, it kind of tells us what the grad assistance program can offer. So counseling services, consultation on wellness, nutrition, physical health, legal and financial advice, crisis supports. They have multi languages. They actually are not offering face-to-face right now, I don't think, but phone and online. So again, we mentioned all these strategies today, and you might think, okay, that's great, but I don't know how to get my physical health in order, or I don't know how to deal with this issue. And use the supports. That's huge. And the last slide here, it just talks about, again, some of the university resources. There's tons of supports for students. So if you feel like I just don't even know how to access the services or what's out there, there are social workers who can help do that at Access Open Minds. For international students, UAI, the International Student Center, is a great place to get information. For First Nations and Métis students, First Peoples House. So you can see like there's some very specific places for specific issues. We're not going to go into all of them today, but just so you know, they exist. Because I think a hard thing about being a grad student is you come here, you don't really know what's out there, you don't know how to access the service. So it's a good starting point to know it exists. And then if there's one that you're like, oh, that would be helpful, you can absolutely, they all have websites, they all have information about how to access it. So I know that's a bit of, oh yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. I just was, not to interrupt, I just was going to mention, because I know sometimes it can be hard to know which service can be helpful. I was just going to highlight a navigation portal called UASU Cares, which is a great way to also just know, which service can be best help you, depending on whether the issue is related to well-being or safety and protection or finances. And it will actually generate a list of both campus and off-campus options and resources that you can also access as well. I just wanted to mention that really quick.
Yes, thank you. I did forget to mention that. So just coming back to the questions, the first one on guilt, I think what Jasmine said is absolutely true, right? Like often when we're feeling guilty, like any emotion, it's always a good idea to ask yourself, why is that feeling there? What is it telling me? And okay, maybe it's saying, you know what, I need to reorganize my time. I need to do things differently. But guilt often gets us into trouble because we tend to beat up on ourselves a lot. And that's not where it's not so helpful. So we want to take the good out of it. Is there something productive I can do to kind of work on the procrastination, but also understanding it's very normal to procrastinate. It's really hard in grad school, particularly working remotely, not to procrastinate. So being upset at ourselves is not helpful, and learning to kind of talk to ourselves in more helpful ways, in kinder ways, can actually make a big difference. Jasmine runs a workshop every semester on self-compassion. So all our workshops will run again next semester, so you can look out for that one, because it goes in really in depth into how do we be more compassionate with ourselves. And then the second question was, how can I overcome apprehension of asking for help? I don't know how my supervisor might react, for instance. It's a good question, I think, and Jasmine, feel free to jump in and add to it, but I think asking for help is a skill in itself. It's something, again, we're not really taught to do, but it's actually super important, because otherwise we tend to get into more trouble by not asking. So if we're scared to ask, we actually sometimes make the problem worse. and then the reaction from the supervisor ends up being worse. Know that most supervisors, they want you to succeed. They're not there to kind of sabotage the journey. We do know some supervisors have much better people skills, are much more involved, or much more encouraging than others. So it can be challenging. I know students I've talked to, sometimes the way they approach it is maybe they'll go to another committee member or a senior member in their department to help figure out, how do I approach this, or can they help me have this conversation? So there's different ways to approach it. And I think it's normal sometimes to feel nervous about that, especially if we are struggling with something or we're not sure what to do, or but know that that's also their job.
Yeah. And I will say that sometimes supervisors are more concerned when we're not asking for help, right? I mean, there's this anticipation and expectation that you're not supposed to know it, and they're supposed to guide and teach you. But they also have a number of different students and projects on the go. So they may not always know also how best to help you unless we actually make the effort to doing that. So I think sometimes there's some internal barriers that get built related to asking for help, this idea that maybe I shouldn't ask for help, or I should know this already, or, and I think that can get in the way as well, or making assumptions of like, they're going to react really poorly. And unfortunately, unless we have the data to support that, all that we can really do is take the risk and maybe start slowly of just to get the feel of how best to ask for help, whether it's over email or just setting up time. But I think other grad students who work with this professor could be a great option as well. Just asking, what are they like if I was to ask for help in this area? And that can be a great resource. I know that was something I found really helpful is working and having a conversation with grad students who had experience working with this supervisor, just knowing, what's their kind of go-to method, what can I expect? And that can be helpful, but still at the end of the day, taking that risk and reaching out is going to be the necessary steps, but being able to be mindful of there might be some pre-steps that could help you make that final move of asking for help.
Absolutely. And I would also say sometimes if your supervisor isn't reacting appropriately, or there's some serious concerns about their behavior, you can go to the chair of your department. You can go to FGSR because that's not okay either, right? We talk about, it's good to be able to take criticism. You have to be able to work independently. Yes, all of that exists. And there's also a line where it's not acceptable. So just know, again, there's resources if you do need support. And I think that's it for questions, unless there's anything else. I'm not sure.
Does anyone else have any other questions? We'll give them a minute here. I just want to say thank you so much for the presentation. I thought it was great. I specifically liked how you guys spoke about how comparison is kind of the thief of joy. You hear that expression a lot, but you rarely hear it framed in the sense where you're only seeing another person's external behavior and their external self, and you see both your internal and external. So I think it's a really good way of kind of giving that expression true life, where sometimes you hear it and you're like, okay, yeah, but they're doing the same thing as me. They're in grad school, they're doing presentations at conferences and writing papers and things like that. And you just kind of forget about the I guess the personal or the internal aspect of life in itself, and you kind of don't relate that aspect of your life to someone else's, and it makes it difficult sometimes.
Absolutely.
I don't see any other questions, so I guess we'll just wrap up and say thank you one more time for the amazing presentation, and sorry about butchering both of your names to start.
That's very much okay. Thank you for including us, and I think the fact that this is one of your seminars this year is actually a good sign, because it shows that you're valuing wellness, and I think that's super important.
Yes, I just want to mention just big kudos to Kevin and Vivian and Fernanda and your team that puts these together. I think what a great way to show care for your teammates and your classmates. I know this isn't an easy topic to bring up or talk about, but really lots of appreciation sent to you, Kevin, and your team for willingness to have this conversation, and for all those that have attended. Thank you for your time and being here with us.
Thank you.